All right, hello everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started for the caucus briefing. All right, thank you guys for all being here. The theme of today's caucus briefing is the rare disease community and Congress changing the status quo. We have a phenomenal panel, moderator, and opening remarks for you guys. I would first like to thank our caucus co-chairs. Of course, in the Senate, we have Senator Amy Klobuchar, who we just heard from, Senator Roger Wicker. In the House, we have Representative Gus Bilirakis and Representative Doris Matsui. And of course, a big thank you to all of our community partners for making this briefing possible and for their partnership. And a huge thank you to today's presenting sponsor, CSL Behring, for making this caucus briefing possible. And a thank you to all of our Rare Disease Week sponsors. This has been a phenomenal week. It couldn't have been possible without our sponsors and with all of you. So a huge collective shout out to everyone. All right, so this is going to be our caucus briefing agenda for today. A lot of the topics that we are going to discuss will be very familiar to you if you were at the legislative conference. We are joined for an introduction from Mary Lacey. She is the head of North America Policy and External Affairs at CSL Behring. Mary Lacey is going to provide you all with some opening remarks and then turn things over to our moderator, Ryan Fisher, who is the Chief Operating Officer at the Foundation for Angelman Syndrome. So Mary Lacey, I will go ahead and turn things over to you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Really appreciate it. As Caitlin said, I'm Mary Lacey Ruther, and I lead the North America Policy, Advocacy, and Government Affairs function for CSL Behring. It is such an honor to be in front of you today. I've worked in the health policy space for almost over 25 years. I hate to tell you, show my age. And the rare disease community has always stood out to me through these many, many years. As I think about this community, I have a personal story that always comes to mind. I grew up in a small town in Mississippi where I was fortunate to be able to have a loving and nurturing community which surrounded me, including my grandmother. Whenever my grandmother would hear me say, "I can't do that," she would immediately look at me with the most stern eyes and say, "Can't, never could." I'll say that again. Can't, never could. She was an example of someone that never let someone tell her that something could not be done. She always found a way to make whatever she wanted really happen. This is exactly the spirit that embodies this community, and why I feel such a kindred spirit with all of you sitting in this room. I've never heard someone say, "I can't." Instead, I've always heard people say, "How are we going to get this done? We can do it." So when I saw the theme of this year's conference, United, Amplified, Stronger Than Ever, I really felt like it reflected perfectly the theme for the 15th anniversary of the Every Life Foundation. And congratulations on a wonderful 15 years. As we celebrate this incredible milestone, it's important to take stock of our progress. I believe it is your resilience as a community and your drive to push beyond status quo that has led us here today. You have demonstrated that a unified, shared purpose fosters progress. In my experience working closely with this community, initiatives led by rare disease advocates demonstrate a remarkable track record of success. It's no coincidence that we've seen the greatest leaps in the last 15 years. You are inspired, impassioned people living with rare diseases, parents, care partners, and most of all, dedicated advocates. You get things done. You always say, I can. And I firmly believe that. Personally, I've been privileged to witness the evolution of rare disease innovations. I was recently very touched by a story shared in CSL's Portraits of Progress campaign. A gentleman reflected on his childhood with hemophilia B compared to his grandson's. His memories involved long stays at hospitals due to a lack of outpatient treatment options for hemophilia B, and sometimes unbearable pain from bleeds. He's now watching his grandchildren pursue active and fulfilling lives thanks to the progress in care and treatment options. I've been proud to be part of CSL Behring and others within the industry that have helped to contribute to these scientific milestones. Most recently, we were able to launch a gene therapy for hemophilia B, which continues this innovation. I can remember 20 years ago, sitting in rooms like this, talking to policymakers about the promise of innovations like gene therapies. At the time, it seemed like science fiction. Today, innovations like gene therapy are not only possible, it's a concrete reality for the rare disease community. On behalf of industry partners, we remain committed to this progress by delivering the best innovations possible for patients. We don't stop with good enough for people living with rare disease. We are driven to keep delivering better therapies and solutions to patients. We are your partners. We are here to roll our sleeves up and work with you on the hard things to get done, to move past status quo. While there's been much progress, we are mindful of the urgency of the moment. There are a good deal of proposed policies that could impact the ability to continue to deliver innovation as well as access to this innovation. As a community dedicated to these impacted by rare diseases, we must continue to show up and advocate for government policies that will foster continued innovation for rare disease, incorporate people's lived experiences into research and advocacy, and help ensure our society protects and promotes access to new therapies when they are developed. Today's briefing will touch on a number of these important public policies that will continue to build on the successes of this community. Witnessing your unparalleled dedication, passion, and determination assures me of our future. Continued scientific advancement in rare diseases, access to innovation treatments, and improvement in quality of life to continue to flourish. We are here to express our deepest gratitude to people living with rare diseases, their families, and their advocates of those tireless efforts that have continued to propel us to new heights. I look forward to continuing to witness the success of this community that never says can't, but instead chooses to say can, and works very hard to achieve this. I remain excited and hopeful for what the next 15+ years will bring to every life in the community it serves. And a big kudos to all of you sitting in this room. It is my honor to be able to introduce today's panel moderator, Ryan Fisher. Who obviously needs no introduction, but I will go ahead and read his bio anyway. Ryan Fisher is the Chief Operating Officer for the Foundation of Angelman Syndrome Therapeutics, or FAST. Ryan works with FAST President to establish, direct, and achieve the organization's short and long-term strategic goals and objectives across all operational areas, including general administration, programs, grants, and stakeholder relations. He's also tasked with maintaining and building effective relationships with key stakeholders, including Congress, regulators, pharmaceutical companies, and other foundation leaders, and the broader rare disease advocacy community. Before joining FAST, Ryan served as Chief Advocacy Officer for Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, PPMD. Ryan held various roles within PPMD over the last 18 years, helping to grow the organization into one of the leading rare disease advocacy nonprofits globally. Without further ado, Ryan.
It's a lot of pressure. So, I will be your cruise director for the afternoon. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for joining us for the Congressional Rare Disease Caucus briefing in partnership with RDLA. I'd like to thank our caucus co-chairs and our community supporters for today's briefing, for it would not be possible without them. I'd also like to congratulate the Every Life Foundation. I know this is a running theme, but it deserves another round of applause for 15 years of advocacy. We would not be here without their leadership, and really our appreciation knows no bounds. So our topic today is the rare disease community in Congress changing the status quo. And this is a topic that resonates with so many in our rare community. Because upon receiving a diagnosis of a rare disease, I think so many realized the status quo for drug development, for access to care, for treatments was simply unacceptable, and that much needed to be done and changed. And it's why we have been advocating for years together in order to change it. It's why we travel to Washington every year to discuss important legislative initiatives that affect the rare disease community and work with members of Congress to drive them forward. So before I really dive into panel introductions, I want to just sort of frame what we're talking about, because the issues that we're talking about really center around breaking down barriers. Whether that be barriers to getting expert care for your rare disease, or accessing the most appropriate treatments, or the barriers to incentives for developing potentially transformative treatments for your disease. These barriers cannot become the status quo. It's why we're on the Hill. It's why we're advocating. Because despite remarkable advancements in research and drug development, along with improvements in care for some individuals' rare disease, significant gaps remain. And they include speeding the development of new potential therapies, or accessing appropriate existing therapies, and access to optimal care. As you're going to hear today from our first speaker, Brian Denger, unfortunately, in many cases, where you live can impact your ability to access the right specialists due to the rarity of your condition. The truth is, not every state has a physician who understands your disease. Therefore, we must reduce barriers to receiving optimal care, including when the most important or most appropriate physicians are not in your home state. You will also hear from Advocate Bridget Brennan, who will speak about the importance of the Pediatric Priority Review Voucher. We need to ensure advancements in innovation in rare disease can be fully realized, and that the pipeline for rare diseases remains active and thriving. Because, as has been stated, 95% of the more 10,000 rare diseases still have no FDA-approved treatment. Let's repeat that. 95% of the more than 10,000 rare diseases still have no FDA-approved treatment. There's a lot of work to be done. Therefore, we must reduce barriers to incentives for developing these potentially life-changing therapies, because incentives do matter, and we've seen it, and we've seen the impact of those incentives. Finally, Advocate Billy Klein will speak about the burden of step therapies. This is an issue facing millions of Americans. When your physician prescribes you a treatment that you and they believe to be your best first line of treatment, you should not have to step through another treatment in order to receive that therapy, period. Time is our most precious commodity, and we need a faster, more consistent process to ensure patients receive the right treatment at the right time. So, today, these three incredible advocates are not only representing their families and communities, but also millions of people diagnosed with a rare disease across this country, and we thank you for that. They will shed light on key legislative priorities, putting a face to these important issues and explaining why the status quo is unacceptable and why we need Congress's help to move critical legislation forward to change it. So, with that, our first speaker is Brian Denger. Brian is the father of an adult daughter and two sons who have Duchenne. Matthew passed away in 2013 at the age of 20, and Patrick is 29 and lives at home. Both of Brian's sons were involved in over a dozen clinical trials collectively. Patrick was enrolled in an exon skipping study in 2016 that required weekly travel from Maine to Baltimore and is currently enrolled in a clinical trial at Kennedy Krieger Institute. Brian became involved in Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, or PPMD, over 20 years ago and has participated in programs with NIH, CDC, and as a consumer reviewer for the CDMRP, all the acronyms I know, at the Department of Defense. He currently works under community engagement at PPMD. He's going to be speaking about the Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act. Brian?
Thank you, Ryan. I have a quick anecdote before I begin. One of my first meetings with Ryan was attending a Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy legislative conference in Washington. And I had gone to a meeting, and my wife was with the two boys, and they were using manual wheelchairs for travel, and Ryan assisted. It was his first time at a conference, and assisted my family, and we knew he was the right person for the community. We sadly lost him from PPMD because he worked with that organization for a long time, and he's spreading his understanding to another organization, and I'm sure that there's a lot of gratitude there. So before I begin, let me say my family hit the third rail when it came to chronic illnesses. My daughter has type 1 diabetes and asthma. She's now a nurse educator working for the Center for Endocrinology in Maine. And so I could speak to any of these issues. My wife has Crohn's disease, and she recently went through a step therapy impediment with the drug that she needed for her condition. She also has Lyme disease. She also has thyroid disease. So all of these issues are relevant to us, but I'm here specifically to speak about the Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act. Now, if I can get my slides. Oh, I'm not seeing it. All right, I'll begin. So I want to address the reasons I support the passage of the Accelerating to Kids Access to Care Act. This legislation is being led in the House of Representatives by Representatives Trahan and Miller Meeks, and in the Senate by Michael Bennett and Chuck Grassley. So according to the National Organization of Rare Disease, the typical time for someone suspected of having a rare medical condition to receive an accurate diagnosis, their diagnostic odyssey is about 5 years, and it involves multiple appointments to see multiple clinicians and great expense. That's likely unsurprising to the advocates in this room and highlights the beginning of their medical journey. They and their families will undertake to obtain appropriate medical care for a loved one living with a rare condition. My family is affected by Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and our journey in this space began 25 years ago with the eventual diagnosis for my older son, Matthew, and 18 months later, again for his brother, Patrick. We live in Maine, which is sparsely populated. Although my sons were being seen by doctors in the state's largest hospital, their diagnosis was still separate and months apart. our situation isn't very different from what most families impacted by Duchenne and so many rare diseases face. So I want to pause here for a minute and admire my sons, and I want you to think about the people that you care for who are affected by rare disease. Because with an estimated 7,000 to 10,000 forms of rare disease, it's important to think any doctor, it's irrational to think any doctor will be able to appropriately care for the complex health care needs of a person with these conditions. Many people affected by rare diseases are seen by multiple clinicians and allied healthcare professionals with a need for coordination and additional experience. Clinical experts are often clustered in larger clinics with greater resources, sometimes linked to research and having access and undertaking clinical trials. Duchenne is a single gene disorder diagnosed in childhood that leads to rapidly worsening muscle weakness and affects all body systems and may involve cognitive and behavioral impairments and significantly shorten lives. Clinical management requires multiple doctors and care provided in an interdisciplinary setting. The United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention first published the Duchenne Care Considerations in 2010, bringing together many clinical experts to provide a template for care. Patients treated in these centers following these guidelines saw improved survival, quality of life, and the average median age of survival soon increased by a decade. That's substantial. Recognizing the need and learning from the practices and successes achieved in cystic fibrosis clinics, Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy initiated a certified Duchenne clinic program based on the CDC guidance. There are now nearly 40 centers established in the U.S. that are primarily in major children's hospitals providing appropriate care for Duchenne. Centers are not in every state. Patients covered by their state's Medicaid health insurances are largely prevented from accessing care at an appropriate Duchenne care center outside of their state based on current regulations. That's a common frustration expressed by families and another one in which I experienced. Several years ago, I applied to Maine's Medicaid program about a decision regarding my son's ability to get treated at Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore. They have the only certified Duchenne program for adults. Despite a favorable ruling with an impartial hearing officer, the state still refused to provide coverage. We continued going to Kennedy Krieger Institute, and we pay out of pocket for travel and the balance from commercial insurance. It's at a higher rate as well because the clinic is out of network. Families without private health insurance or financial resources are often left seeing doctors with little or no neuromuscular experience, and they must cobble together the various specialties with no clinical continuity. I can't count the times a doctor has told me that they only heard about Duchenne in medical school. These doctors may provide good care for common conditions, yet the lack of familiarity with Duchenne care leads to inadequate interventions affecting disease management and progression of symptoms. Timing for the initiation of treatments is often crucial. For Duchenne, beginning steroid therapy appropriately can delay loss of walking and preserve upper body strength, eliminating the need for spinal intervention surgery for scoliosis. Delaying intervention can prevent the efficacy of these treatments and lead to children needing to have these surgeries. Heart failure in Duchenne is not the same as it is for adults in the general population. And many insurance policies for recently approved gene and antisense oligonucleotide therapies require a prescribing physician to be a Duchenne muscular dystrophy specialist. Similar to the progression in many rare diseases, as patients with Duchenne's get older, their care becomes significantly more complicated. The reality is states recognize that children with serious, often rare medical conditions need assistance. There is a reason for medically fragile, children with complex medical conditions, Katie Beckett, and similar programs being part of a state's Medicaid waiver program. For out-of-state services require prior authorization, and provider enrollment are often lengthy processes and never assure a patient will be approved for obtaining these crucial services. States deny coverage of out-of-state services except for under special circumstances stating comparable services are available within the state. Comparable and appropriate are entirely different when it comes to treating rare disease, right? The Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act seeks to overcome one of the barriers families face in obtaining appropriate care for someone with a rare disease covered by Medicaid. This legislation would create a pathway for out-of-state providers to enroll in another state's Medicaid program. The legislation establishes coordination across state lines by clarifying the process by which state Medicaid programs cover this care regardless of where the child lives and where the care is received. This legislation removes another barrier for families seeking appropriate care for a child with a rare disease. Increasing access by removing barriers makes sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. I'm sure many in the room can really, understand the need for this and go through similar experiences of trying to get the most optimal care. Thank you for shedding light and telling your story. So our next speaker is Bridget Brennan. They gave me her updated bio, and it's in font size 9, so I'm going to do my best to read it. Bridget brings over 30 years of legal training and passion for advocacy to Friedreich Ataxia Research Alliance, where she serves as Board of Director, General Counsel, and Director of Advocacy. She is also a founder and board member of FARA Europe. Bridget joined the rare disease community when her son was diagnosed with Friedreich ataxia 9 years ago. She has then partnered with numerous groups to expedite rare disease research, including serving on several Every Life committees, as well on Innovation and Value Initiatives Steering Committee that just published Valuing Rare Disease Treatments in Healthcare. Bridget has a BA from the University of Rochester and JD from Forum. She is a member of the bar in New York and New Jersey and currently holds an elected position in Larchmont, New York, as village trustee, and she's going to be talking about the pediatric priority review voucher. Bridget?
Thank you, everyone. So good afternoon. I first would like to thank the Every Life Foundation for hosting an amazing Rare Disease Week. I mean, what an accomplishment. This is the 9th year I've had the pleasure of being part of this community, and I have been to, I think, every Rare Disease Week since then, and it is such a privilege to see how it has grown and accomplished so much, not only for our community, but for all of the groups that are joining us here today. I also want to thank all of you advocates, those in the room and those at home, because it is our collective voice that is able to raise the conversation around rare disease and share what an incredible unmet need we are all facing. I'm here today to tell you a little bit about Friedreich's ataxia. So Friedreich's ataxia, or FA, is a degenerative neurological disease caused by a single gene mutation. The result of this mutation is that the individual produces less of a naturally occurring protein called frataxin. Onset is usually in childhood, although it does sometimes occur in adulthood. Symptoms include ataxia, loss of coordination, fatigue, impaired speech, vision, and hearing, diabetes, and heart disease. Heart disease is what takes our loved ones, often in young adulthood. There are no cures for FA, but there are compelling drug targets, and 1 year ago, we had our first approved treatment on Rare Disease Day. Skyclarys targets a molecular pathway called NRF2. It's not a cure and it doesn't address the underlying cause of the disease, but it does slow down the neurological loss. I'll take it. As a side note, for anyone sitting in the audience today that's new to the rare disease community, and you might be overwhelmed and thinking, what can I actually do? It was an FA mom, not a researcher, who made the connection between a paper that had been published on NRF2 and its connection to FA, and a small pharmaceutical company in Texas that was working on a treatment for that pathway. She called Farah and said, could this help our kids? And that started the road to Skyclarys. So you never know what small action you take might be the catalyst of change. Farah, of course, immediately reached out to Riata and said, let's talk about a trial on FA. And for these discussions, Farah was armed with a lot of regulatory programs that have been built to encourage people to come into the rare disease space, including the Pediatric Priority Review Voucher Program, which I'll discuss a little more in detail. But also Farah had the resources it had generated over the years, including an educated and engaged community in research and a well-established natural history. I know that many of us live in the weeds of research in this room, but we do have some congressional staffers that may not know what a natural history is. So natural history is when a patient returns every year to go through standardized tests so that we can see what the normal course of a disease is. Makes sense. In practicality for families, that means you travel, often long distances to research sites, so that you can see how your loved one's disease has progressed and what they may have lost in that year. You leave that appointment not with a treatment to slow or stop their condition, but really with a hope that what you did might lead to a treatment one day. And it's because of that, in our FA community, that's exactly what happened. Upon learning that Riata had positive data from a clinical trial, discussions began with the FDA. The gold standard for approval is 2 randomized placebo-controlled studies. We had 1. The question remained whether Riata needed to do a second trial, or could the FDA apply the flexibility that Congress had given them to accept 1 trial with confirmatory evidence? And would that confirmatory evidence, what would that include? The result, Farah's natural history study, generated from all those appointments that families had done over the years, and I'm so incredibly grateful to them, was used for a propensity matching study where each person that had participated in the trial was matched to someone in the natural history study who obviously was not on drug. And Riata was able to show that there was a 55% slowing of neurological loss by doing that study. That was the confirmatory evidence that the FDA needed to have for approval. So I'm not here for access, but I did think we should talk just a moment about access, especially because we have all the staffers here. So we have been 1 year into our approval. 25 states still do not have a policy on Skyclarys, and several of those states will not allow any access without a policy. It's too long, guys. And so many of the states are also doing something where they're taking the exclusion criteria from the clinical trial and they're pulling it into the prior authorization criteria. So when you conduct a clinical trial, of course, you need exclusion criteria for a couple of reasons. One is you may have a vulnerable individual who maybe somebody has a severe heart disease and it's an experimental drug, so we don't want to hurt anybody. And second, you don't want unintended noise. So if somebody has a severe heart disease and has an adverse reaction to the disease, that might impact whether the drug is reviewed favorably. So it makes sense to have parameters there. But once a drug is found to be safe and effective, in theory, it should work for everybody. And so we should not need to have those parameters anymore. So FARA and our amazing advocates, who we have some here on Rare Disease Day and, as well, they have been going out throughout the country to the Medicaid hearings and trying to explain some of this to the committees that are trying to make the policies around Skyclarys. It is a slow, time-consuming, and frustrating process. And where are we now? Well, we know Skyclarys reduces neurological loss, but we don't have any data on the cardiac impact. We also have a treatment, but the treatment is only for people 16 and older. We are a pediatric onset condition. And we are hoping that this year, the pediatric arm will start. That is 7 years after the adult trial began. We know from other communities like SMA that early intervention has the greatest potential of benefit. And so FARA is making it a priority in our community to encourage our industry partners to think about bringing pediatrics in early, as soon as we can. Let's get those treatments to the children that need it. Now, I did mention that frataxin was the cause of FA, but when you collect a lot of data and you have an opportunity to really look at that data, you learn a lot more. It clarifies the picture a little better. And Larimar Therapeutics just produced this slide in a recent meeting, and it shows that the lower the frataxin level, the earlier the onset in children, and the more severe their progression. So frataxin is really correlated exactly to the symptoms of FA. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could just give frataxin to our children? I mean, that would solve the problem. Oops, sorry, let me go back one. So Larimar Therapeutics is in fact trying to do that. They have developed a treatment to replace frataxin and have raised frataxin in both skin and buccal cells. They are addressing the underlying cause of FA and maybe all the associated symptoms, including heart disease. Larimar just finished their phase 2 trial and will begin an open label extension study. And most importantly, there's already discussions about opening a pediatric arm study as well. Furthermore, the FDA has acknowledged that frataxin deficiency appears to be critical to the pathogenic mechanism of FA, basically what causes the symptoms. And as such, measuring those levels could possibly be a novel surrogate endpoint. A surrogate endpoint is just a marker that's reasonably likely to predict a clinical benefit, but it doesn't in itself reflect a clinical benefit. So if frataxin goes up, it's more likely your symptoms will go down, right? The symptoms are the clinical benefit. But having a surrogate endpoint could open up the pathway for accelerated approval, and that would get the treatment to all patients much, much earlier. And maybe when we hit the access piece, it'll be a little easier if we had a blood test that just measured frataxin. So I know that the advocates here are well-versed on the Pediatric Priority Review Voucher and the Creating Hope Reauthorization Act, and spent most of yesterday encouraging legislators to support this. So I won't go into a lot of details, but for those that are here that do not know this program, it is basically an incentive program for drug developers to get into the rare pediatric space. If an industry partner develops a treatment for a rare pediatric and can actually get it over the finish line, they are given a voucher. The voucher can be used on a subsequent drug that they're developing to reduce the review time at the FDA, or if they only do rare diseases, they don't need that because they will always have an expedited review, and then they can sell the voucher and use the money to help support their programs. So far, there have been 49 vouchers issued in the rare pediatric space in 40 different diseases. So this program is working. Companies are both developing drug programs for rare pediatric conditions and gaining approval for those products. Let's take a moment to look at the two companies that I shared with you today. Reata and Larimar are both small biotech pharma companies. Neither of them had a prior approval, so they have no revenue source. They are relying on investments to keep their product going, and time is of the essence. Each developed a regulatory strategy, which included the Pediatric Priority Review Voucher. They were able to take a risk and get into the rare disease space, specifically the FA community space, because of the support these programs provide. As Ryan mentioned, and I'm going to highlight again, 95% of rare disease patients do not have a treatment. And when that's the case, we need more, not less programs to spur innovation. We as a community need to push to get the Creating Hope Reauthorization Act passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. And I know firsthand in our community in Angelman syndrome, we have benefited from the PRV and seeing investment in Angelman syndrome because of it. So it's so important to continue to really strive for incentives for really funding rare disease programs. So our final speaker on the panel is Billy Klein. Billy is 48 years old and has severe hemophilia B, which he was diagnosed with at birth. Billy's career in health information technology, where he serves as a community project manager for the Health Information Exchange in Ohio. He has served as a patient advocate for both nonprofit organizations and pharmaceutical companies, where he has shared his experience living with hemophilia, including that he did not start prophylactic treatment until his 30s. Billy's going to speak about the Safe Step Act. Billy?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for this opportunity to get up here and speak before you today. I thought it was going to be a little more nerve-wracking, but honestly, I've talked to so many of you this week and shared our stories. I've been practicing all week long. So you're going to see me kind of look back here and look at my slides because I don't see them on this computer, but I will just be.
What is it? Oh, Caitlin, you got it? Okay. There you go, look.
All right. Okay. So a little bit of background. I have severe hemophilia B, and I was diagnosed at birth. So I've been on Factor IX products all throughout the years. In 2013, I moved to Rixubis. Thank you. And with that, I didn't start prophylactic treatment until I was in my 30s. So I did on-demand treatment from the time I was born up until I was about 33. So I've been married to my beautiful, smart, funny wife, Rachel, and together we've raised 3 amazing boys, Logan, Trey, and Noah. And so prior to starting the prophylactic treatment, again, I infused on demand. Before I started my current position, I worked a very physical job. So I was setting up telecommunications, satellite communications for a company that was a contractor for the iLottery. So it was a lot of climbing ladders, lugging 40-pound cinder blocks up an 18-foot ladder, usually about 8 at a time, or one at a time, but getting them up there to hold down the satellites and whatnot. So a very physical job. And during that, 1 year I was tracking my bleeds. And so for anybody that doesn't know, the hemophilia is a condition where your blood doesn't clot. So you have to infuse medication to give you the ability to clot. And so, I would have internal bleeds, spontaneous bleeds, and usually in my joints. And so throughout that prior year, I was tracking my bleeds, and I had about 70 bleeds, on average. And it was pretty normal for me. I didn't even know any different. So I spent a lot of time on the weekends. I'd be kind of laying around icing a joint or just taking it easy from work the previous week. And so there was a lot of times I didn't get to spend that quality time with my kids or my family, the way that I wanted to. So after attending an informational dinner courtesy of the Southwestern Ohio Hemophilia Foundation, along with my wife, we sat through the benefits of prophylactic treatment. And so, got to understand what the value of that could bring. And so, sitting there listening to all this, my wife was like, why haven't you ever done this before? And I'm like, I'm just old school, baby. And for any of you that are married, she gave me that look. And she was like, do you know how dumb you sound right now? And I'm like, okay. So the next week, we started prophylactic treatment. And still continuing into that very rigorous job, I was tracking bleeds, and I went from 70 bleeds down to 7 within a year. So it turned out to be a life-changing situation for me to where, I could live a normal life. I do a lot of things right now. There's not much that I can't do. And so, been doing that since 2014. And, with prophylactic treatment, it even saved my life. During that job, I was getting equipment from a storage unit. I slipped on the ice and tried to catch myself by grabbing a hold of the van door, my service van. And when I twisted, I did a spiral fracture on my femur. So it was the coldest day of the year in 2014. And I'm laying there, I'm like, man, I didn't know exactly what happened. So I pulled myself over my van, opened my door to my van, and, started making phone calls. Called my hematologist, and like, this is the situation. I've already called 911. I'm just gonna lay here till they get here. And so what do I do next? And so they pointed me to the hospital I need to go to, where I'd undergo surgery. And the first hospital, they got me to, didn't want to do surgery on me because I was a hemophiliac. They just wanted to cast me up and send me home. And my wife, who was my advocate, was like, no, we're not doing that. So she made them transport me to another hospital. There we found somebody that was willing to do the surgery, and they ran a plate up the side of my femur. And so, but before surgery, they were talking. I could hear them talking outside while I was getting prepped. And so the orthopedic surgeons were like, this guy's a hemophiliac? Like, he's not even bruised. Like, how is that possible? Well, I had infused that morning right before I'd had that accident. So it was really, by the grace of God, that, everything just kind of aligned, or else I really would have been in a bad way. All right, so I had considered taking an alternative medication. Time goes by, advancements. And so I was talking with my doctors, like, is there anything new, cutting edge? And he was telling me, he's like, there's something a little bit longer lasting. He's like, so currently with Rixubis, I infuse twice a week to keep my clotting levels up. And through that, I'm able to live a pretty normal life. But then there's this other medication called Alprolix that would allow me to infuse 3 times a month every 10 days. And, just wouldn't have to inject so often, wouldn't have to stick myself. So I decided in 2017 that I would give it a try. And at first, it was amazing. I was like, this is incredible. Every once in a while, I'd bump into something. I'd just kind of pause. I'm thinking, am I going to have to infuse? Didn't have to. All right? And so, but as you can see in this picture right here, I had an allergic reaction to it. So that picture right there is my face just swollen up. And, at first, my sister-in-law saw it. She's a nurse. And she's like, what's going on with your face? And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, that's not normal. And so, I was like, well, okay, I better go get it checked out, and went and talked to my doctor. And he's like, okay. No, he's like, that's not good. So here's the other picture here. So one of the serious side effects of Alprolix can be the face swelling. And so with this, you've got it's a serious situation. So, after we had gone through this and, I talked to my provider, he's like, there's one other drug out there that's long acting. He goes, but odds are, because of the technology, you're going to have the same reaction to it. So, we probably better go back to Rick Subas. I'm like, you know what? That's a great idea. Everything was working just fine. It's not broken, so let's not try and fix it. All right, so, but my insurance changed. So Alprolix and Rev9 are the two preferred medications for my insurance company this year that wanted me to go through step therapy. And so step therapy, I had to tell you all that other stuff to kind of lead up to this. But so step therapy, they were trying to get me to go to step therapy. And I was like, okay, well, we've already done this. So my provider, did the prior authorization, sent in the information, and, thinking, okay, this will be taken care of in a week. My hematology treatment center is amazing. To this day, my entire life, I've gone to Dayton Children's Hospital for hemophilia. You sit in there in the waiting room, you're a lot taller than the rest of the patients. And so, but they are on top of everything that I need always. My nurse, Cheryl Coffey, is always right there going to battle with the insurance companies and ready to take on anything that I need. And so, we went through, and you'll see the three targeted medications, Benefix, Infinity, and then Rixubis. They are not listed on this formulary. And, Rixubis is my preference, but I could have gone to one of these others, but it wasn't even an option. And so, as I said, we have the new insurance that went into effect this year. And, the prior authorizations, it was just not a workable situation as far as transitioning to either one of these medications. So, and as I was saying to my insurance company, like, guys, I'm not trying to be difficult. Like, I can't go to what you're trying to send me to. My doctor sent it in. We've done 3 prior authorizations. We did a formal complaint, and then it went under review, and it got denied every time. So, and anybody that could have gone to a longer-lasting medication, if they had that option, who wouldn't want that? They would have already done it. I would have already done it. It just wasn't in the cards for me. So what ended up happening is I got my medication approved last week. And I was at a speaker training in Ohio for an advocacy day coming up, and I heard another gentleman talk about how he went outside of the norms and emailed the CEO of the insurance company. So I told my wife about this. And my wife is my strongest advocate. My wife is a badass. She got on the internet, found the emails of the entire C-suite of my insurance company, emailed them on Monday, got a reply back by Tuesday, had an authorization by Thursday. So the point of what I'm trying to say here today is that, everybody here, I've talked to so many people, you shouldn't have to go through that. You should be able to come into the new year and just have the comfort of knowing that your medication is going to be covered, that your provider knows that if they could move you, they would, and if it made sense, they would. Otherwise, it's not going to work out for you. So today, my ask is that, anybody here that can, please support the STEP Act, Bill HR 2630, that will provide the more timely resolution for patients to get the medications that they need. Thank you all very much for your time today.
Thank you, Billy. That was great. Okay, so we're going to do some questions for the panelists. I do want to give one more round of applause for all 3 panelists. Unbelievable. Really, thank you. So the first question is actually for all 3 of you, if you can do it one at a time. Throughout the briefing, You've discussed innovations, new therapies, and access paradigms of great importance to each of your individual rare disease communities. What advice or words of wisdom would you give to other rare communities who are working towards these same goals? And maybe we'll start with Brian.
So I guess the best advice I can give is to don't give up. Find people within your community, whether it's in your own disease community or people in the rare disease community broadly who have some similar experience when it comes to denials regarding services, whether it's for medications, as Billy described, or whether it's for going out of state and getting access to a child. There are states that do have an avenue in which you can, as a parent, bring your child to a specialty center, and the access is there. But most of that, it seems like it's intentionally difficult to get information regarding Medicaid. And when you connect with these other people, they may have some experience and be able to guide you. The most confounding thing about Medicaid is it's a federal and state partnership, and each state's services and programs are very, very different. But there are commonalities, and if you find people within your state, irrespective of whether they have the same condition or not, reach out to them and don't give up. Again, with access, as all three of us have talked about, don't give up. Appeal. Go to external review if you need to for getting an approval through your insurance company. You are your loved one's best advocate, and that's my recommendation, is just to stay on top of it.
Great, thank you. Bridget?
Patient advocacy groups are in a unique position where you have relationships with all of the stakeholders needed to get a drug from the original idea in academia all the way through to the approval and even onto access. And sometimes each of those stakeholders are working really hard in their own area to move their project along. But they don't always have the time to know what's going on with the other stakeholders. And the patient advocacy groups are in a really great position to be the group that brings everyone together. If you can create opportunities for your stakeholders to share information, work out problems that they're all facing together, strategize on next steps for research, you will save a lot of people time instead of having everybody trying to do it on their own. So I would just say communications, keep the communications open.
Billy? Besides find a badass? Which is good advice.
I would say just know that you can make a difference. Honestly, before all this, I was thinking, who am I? You know, I got asked to come here and just share my story. I didn't realize there was going to be so many people here, so many similar situations, so many people dealing with the same thing. So be creative, you know, get in front of people. I never would have thought to, you know, reach out to the folks that my wife reached out to. But it was all at the advice of somebody else that had gone through a similar situation. So you can be heard, be an advocate, get in front of people, and you can make a difference. Thank you.
I agree, and I think learning from each other has been so important. Many of us have gone through, whether it's the sort of access problems or, you know, the issues of getting out-of-state care. We have to collaborate and work together and say what worked for you. If you could go back in time, how would you do it different for your community? We're now in this situation. So I think sharing is what's going to really help everybody in their path forward in these paradigms. Okay, so some individual questions. Brian, the Accelerating Kids Access to Care Act is crucial for children seeking access to care for rare and complex diseases. Many of those watching today are caregivers of children who would benefit from passage of this legislation, what actions can they take to advocate for this bill?
So even from home, you can reach out to your members of Congress. Find the email of the office, find the phone number, and ask to speak to their legislative aide that's in charge of health care. And then tell your story. You don't have to be really versed in the legislation. The fact that you believe that your family can benefit from this because you have a child who has a condition that might be better served in an academic setting or a larger children's hospital where the resources and the administration of care is more appropriate, that's the story you need to tell. You need to tell about the condition, regardless of what it happens to be, and let those people know about your particular situation. There are offices within each state. If you have the ability to travel to the office, go and speak to a member of the staff. Let them know what you're hoping to achieve, that this is legislation that's important to you and your family, and they can help you to find the pathway to get to the right person within the office and communicate your request. Email, telephone, they'll give you guidance as to what is appropriate. But again, most of us are just our moms and dads. I won't say just, that's a disrespect, but we're moms and dads. We're loved ones of somebody, but we do care. And when we tell we all have a compelling story. When we verbalize that to these individuals, they have family as well, and they understand. We're not going to be successful in every situation. There are just some members of Congress who this just doesn't appeal to. It's not one of their priorities. But if we get to a majority of them and we convince them that this is what is important to us, that's our purpose, and this legislation will be passed. So I think that telling your story, giving them access to the information, it's available to them through Every Life Foundation, and explain to the office that here's the bill that I'm interested in, here's the legislation, this is how it would affect my family, and tie the two together, and then follow up afterwards to learn whether or not their boss will support that particular legislation, and be sure to thank them both for their time, but also if they're successful in getting their boss to co-sponsor the legislation.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, Bridget, can you speak more about the impact of the PRV on the approval for the FA therapy in February 2023? If this program is not renewed, what does that mean for rare disease communities who are working towards a drug or treatment?
Sure. So one of the things I didn't mention earlier, but it's very worth mentioning here, is that when FARA first reached out to RIATA to talk about doing a clinical trial in FA wasn't on the radar. They were looking at a very different condition. And having those programs were important to incentivize them to consider coming into the rare disease space. But it also opened up a conversation about the age that they were going to use for their clinical trial. They had been following what was the standard of doing adults first and then going to pediatrics. And by talking about the goals and the purposes around the pediatric priority review voucher, it was a door opening for us to be able to try to get them to consider reducing the age. We would have loved it down to 10 or 8, but we got it to 16, which allowed 2 years of our children to get the drugs sooner than they would have. So that was a really important conversation that also came out of this program. Not having the program could be detrimental. I mean, there may be treatments out there that could work in a rare disease program, and it's a balancing act for industry partners. They do need to consider if they can get their product across the finish line and recoup their investments. And so not having that incentive could stop a rare disease community from being able to persuade someone to try their condition for a treatment. It would be very unfortunate.
I'd like to add a little bit to the pediatric voucher discussion. And in regards to the fact that it doesn't cost the federal government any money. All it does is it shortens the approvals process time for industry. So you are giving them the ability to get products to market more rapidly. And you're incentivizing people to be interested in rare disease. You know, we're talking about conditions in which there are less than 5,000 or less than 1,000 individuals, and to find those patients, that's almost an insurmountable task. So you want to incentivize these companies, biotechs, pharma, I don't care who it is, to be interested in our conditions. And if this tool can be utilized, and then they get the pediatric voucher with an approved product, they can either sell that voucher for somebody else who has a product that they want to hasten to market, or they can use it themselves for their next iteration of a treatment. It makes no difference to us. We are interested in finding treatments for our loved ones. And if this is not going to cost the federal government anything, it's FDA has just shortened the time frame to get approvals, then that makes a whole lot of sense to me.
Thank you, Brian. Billy, you have the last question. The Safe Step Act would ensure that rare disease patients have timely access to medications that they need. Members of Congress and their staff are in attendance today, and we're grateful for that, representing their constituents from all the U.S. What insight can you provide them as to why this bill is crucial to the rare community?
It's not a one-size-fits-all whenever it comes to medications. You know, everybody in here has a specialist they see. Your primary care provider's not cut out to just provide this care, they would. So you're seeing somebody that's dedicated their entire lives to what you're dealing with. And through that, you know, the insurance companies have got to take it, you know, at face value that, you know, if your provider says you can't move to this medication for whatever reason, you know, he's not just blowing smoke. This is what it is. You know, people are dealing with really tough situations and, you know, all kinds of different reasons of why they couldn't move from one medication to another. So, you know, your physician, you know, we all trust our physicians. You know, I've seen several through retirement over the years and been going to the same hospital for 48 years. And I trust, you know, in that they have my care at the forefront of every decision that's made, and they include me in making that decision. So I think that, you know, we all know somebody that's dealing with some situation or another. And right now I'm on a treatment that works. You know, I am living my best life every day. And it's because of the regimen that we came up with. And, you know, a lot of people will try to move to something else. It could have some really severe consequences. And, you know, you're losing time of your life, could be months, and it could be something deadly. So that's why I would say this would be a good reason to support this, because it just makes sense.
Well said. Okay, so with that, I want to close by thanking our speakers, to also all the members of Congress who have joined the caucus today, to the staffers in attendance and to the staffers who've been meeting with our advocates. I want to thank everyone here in person and those virtually for joining us. You know, this week is so special to our community every year. In some ways, it's like a family reunion. We come to Washington every year to be heard, to be seen, and to be understood. And hopefully work with Congress to break down barriers and change the status quo. I do love the tagline for this year's conference. It's quite fitting: unified, amplified, stronger than ever, and I'd add indeed, stronger together. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today. For all our advocates, just to remember we have a group photo on the steps. Is it raining? No, she's saying no. Did I miss a memo? Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Ryan and this phenomenal panel for everything. So it turns out everybody came to Washington for Rare Disease Week, including Mother Nature. And it is raining, and it's anticipated to be raining. There's like a 90% chance of rain, and you'll all appreciate we were all standing with our different weather apps outside, and some said 60%, and some said 50%, and some said 90%. And we're like, this is probably how the FDA feels about making regulatory decisions. But here's the deal. We're not going to make you stand on the steps of the Capitol, even if it's a 50% chance of rain. However, I would approve a drug that had a 50% chance of benefit. So with that, our next event for all of us is at from 3:45 to 5:45 is the Rare Artists Reception. So please join us at the Rare Artists Reception. And if you want the details, it's in your program, but just a reminder, it's in the Russell Senate Office Building, the Kennedy Caucus Room. Thank you all for being here with us.